If you have ever wanted to learn game development, now is the time. There are so many tools and resources available that makes it possible for anyone to create a good quality game. In this video series, you will learn how to navigate around Unreal Engine, make basic code, create a simple game, and most importantly, understand the whole process. Everything is free. No extra course, no Patreon paywall, nothing. No previous game development experience required, no designing skills required, no programming experience. First, I will explain how game development works. Then, how to navigate around in Unreal Engine before we start diving into how to actually create games. Keep in mind that game development is a big subject. You will need to practice a lot before everything sits. Something you might be wondering is, how difficult is it to make games and to use Unreal Engine? While there are challenges at times, it's not actually very difficult per se. For me personally, the difficult part was to learn and understand everything. Things have gotten much easier over time. Before you start making games, it's important to know how games work. I don't expect you to remember everything you learn, but instead, use it as a reference whenever you need to practice. With time and consistency, you will master Unreal Engine in no time. Back in the day, you would have to create a game from scratch. This means that the developers would have to manually code their own rendering, physics, collision, and everything else. With game engines, these things are being handled for us, and we can worry about the fun stuff rather than the difficult stuff. Think about it like this. When we use a kitchen, we only think about the food, instead of manually creating an oven, mixer, or microwave. We don't have to weld knives or create plates. A game engine is a kitchen that comes with everything, and we only have to worry about the food. So we don't have to worry about the graphics, rendering, advanced mathematical equations that handle our game logic, and so on. Unreal Engine also comes with its own animation setup, Particle Creator, pre-made code that lets us make games without writing a single line of code, landscape creators, and much more. Games need to have proper lighting, realistic shadows, good graphics. These calculations are handled by shaders. A shader is a computer program that determines how pixels or 3D objects should be rendered on the screen. This is just one of the things that Unreal handles for us. For example, in Unreal Engine 4, you would need to bake the lighting of objects. This means that the engine would calculate how a chair would emit shadows and receive light once, instead of recalculating every frame. In Unreal Engine 5, however, we can skip this step, and the lighting is done real time, which makes a game more realistic and saves us time. Let's start off by understanding how 3D geometry works. A 3D shape that exists in a game world is called a mesh. A mesh is simply three parts coming together. These parts consist of vertices, edges, and faces. So for example, this cube consists of multiple vertices, edges, and faces. In Blender, I can select different parts of the cube. Vertices, or singular, vertex, is a single point in space, like a corner. When you connect another vertex, you get an edge. Multiple edges connected together form a face, called a flat surface. This is the part of the mesh that you actually see. A face is formed by three or more vertices, connected by edges, and the final product is a mesh. Every 3D object in a game, like trees, rocks, cubes, hats, weapons, is a mesh. Characters, for example, are also made from vertices, edges, and faces. But since characters need to move, they need to be rigged. Rigging essentially means that you give a mesh a skeleton. That way, you can move different parts of the character depending on the animation. So for a human, you would give it arms, legs, hips, so that you can animate it. When a mesh also has a skeleton, it is known as a skeletal mesh. If a mesh in your game doesn't have any special properties, like a rock, for example, it is referred to as a static mesh. In order to design a mesh, we will need to create a texture and assign it to the faces. Textures are typically 2D images like JPEG or PNG. But since a mesh is a 3D object and a texture is in 2D, we need to wrap it around the mesh, kind of like wrapping a gift box. But in order for the texture to properly align with the mesh, it will need to know what parts of the texture to apply to specific parts of the mesh. This process is known as UV mapping. Think about this process like having a globe and flattening it into a map, then assigning the 2D texture on the specific parts of the map, then reassembling the 3D mesh with the texture applied to the specific parts. So for example, using this cube, I will apply a texture with multiple colors. I want the top of the cube to be red and the rest of the cube to be blue. How can we decide that the red part of the texture is applied to the top and the blue part to the rest of the cube? We can decide what part of the texture to apply to each face in Blender, where the faces of the cube are flattened, and we can assign the 2D texture to each face. When we export it from Blender to Unreal Engine, it will remember the coordinates we assigned the texture. We will dive deeper into how to do this later, so don't worry about the how. I just want you to know what's going on. We can also put multiple textures together to make it more realistic. This is called a material. A material consists of one or multiple textures and comes with different settings you can adjust to make it look a certain way. For example, metallic. Like the name implies, make your material look more like metal, or a normal map that will give the illusion of 3D depth. In 2D, you only have the X and the Y axis. You might even have gone through this at school. In 3D, however, we also have the Z axis, so any mesh can be moved, scaled, or rotated towards these directions.